Stormy weather indeed. Well, one of those passengers caught up in the flight chaos was Dom Biela, who was travelling from Budapest to London. Believe it or not, it took 22 hours instead of 2.5. Dom, welcome to the show. Tell us about your unbelievable journey home. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, it was kind of what started off as being the end of a very lovely weekend away in Budapest.
Yeah.
Ended up being a 22-hour nightmare. So the initial idea was to we're flying from Budapest into Stansted. But when we initially got on the plane, we were told that there was going to be, initially we were told an hour and 10-minute delay because of the storms. And I had no idea there were storms at that point. When we were kind of sat on the tarmac, I had a quick look online. Thankfully, though, it then shortened down to 35 minutes, so we were able to kind of get up and get going. But as we approached into Stansted, the winds kind of took over. And yeah, the turbulence was absolute nightmare. We tried to land twice, and after the second attempt, they kind of bailed, and then they decided to divert us to Manchester. Right. But then that's when it got a little bit, long.
And how bad was it trying to come into land? Was it one of those where it was sort of jumping about and moving from side to side, and then they came almost all the way down, then throttled up again?
Yeah, essentially. So it was really kind of, the flight over from Europe was completely fine. It was only when we started kind of gearing closer to the UK when it started to get a little bit more turbulent. When we started coming down to kind of land and you could see the ground coming up, that's when it really kind of kicked up. Right. The worst part really for us as passengers was when the flight came back up again, because that's when you're kind of going through the clouds and the turbulence really kind of kicks in again. And that's when your stomach starts to churn, because then the plane was flying all over the place and darting all over. So, yeah.
Yeah, troublesome. So you got to Manchester. What happened next?
So we've kind of left stranded, really, by Ryanair. So we were on the tarmac in Manchester.
It's like that movie, isn't it? Planes, Trains and Automobiles. But carry on.
Yeah, no, essentially. So the problem that we mainly had was when we landed, we were kind of sat there for 3 hours. We had absolutely no communication. The pilot wasn't kind of making any kind of announcements. Right. The only communication that we were getting is from people standing near the pilot, trying to get some information from the kind of staff and trying to get anything from there. We had no water. There was no kind of food. There was nothing. And then there was, because of the turbulence and the kind of the experience that it was, we had someone who passed out. Right. So she was initially lying on the floor when we were coming into land. Right. And there was a pregnant lady on the flight as well who had to get escorted off.
Right. Blimey. So, I mean, you were sat there because there was no gate, presumably, to go to. You didn't know if you were going to take off again. And so after 3 hours, eventually something happened?
So I don't know the full reasons to why we were sat there. The kind of speculation was that Ryanair didn't want to kind of finish and classify the flight as being finished in Manchester, because it then would mean that they would have to sort out transportation or hotels. So they wanted to fly back to Stansted. Therefore, they could classify the flight as being finished. Therefore, they don't have to look after the passengers. So we were then given the option of, if you want to leave the flight, you can. But if you leave the flight, then you're on your own. They're not going to support. They can't financially give us anything. Then if you do this on the flight, then you will hopefully end up back in Stansted. But then the people who did, there was probably about 80% left, 20% stayed on. And I later found out through X that the people who then stayed on the flight, when they were going back to Stansted, actually ended up back in Budapest because the plane tried to land and gave up and then flew back to Budapest.
Right. And you had a few choice messages. We looked through some of them to Ryanair. We've been showing some of them, but obviously we've had to censor them to some extent. But I mean, I was watching last night. There's a Twitter account called Flight Radar 24, and I don't know if you saw any of that, but there was incredible pictures of these, planes just flying round and round and round over Gatwick, planes that had left Dublin to go to Manchester, had gone to Manchester and then gone back to Dublin and then tried again and gone back to Belfast. I mean, it was a real night of chaos. And I mean, I suppose, we make jokes about it all the time. I don't know why people have problems with storms. But I mean, you might say if they'd known the storms were that bad, they probably should never have taken off, should they?
Well, that's essentially what all the passengers were saying. So we were kind of in agreement that the flight should never have happened. Or if it were to happen, the thing is, storms do happen, and kind of all the passengers were kind of aware of that. I think the main issue really came is the way that Ryanair kind of treated the passengers. We were hemmed in that plane for 3 hours, no communication, no nothing. And then when people got off the flight, there was absolutely no help for them. And then as of literally an hour ago, we got an email from Ryanair just basically saying, storms happen, thank you for just flying with us. So they've kind of washed their hands with it and want nothing to do with it.
Right.
So yeah, the kind of accountability for it is just non-existent. With
No,
Ryanair.
I mean, they'll probably say, well, it's because we're a budget airline, we don't have that kind of money, and that's why we can charge you so little for where we take you. But I mean, you ended up getting a bus followed by a train. And I think your final social media post was of a rather sorry-looking sandwich when you finally got home.
Yeah.
What was that, and how much did it cost you?
So in the end, I can't remember off the top of my head, but when we got off the flight, the kind of queue for passport control was huge.
Right.
So my partner and I, we were kind of working out, well, how do we get south? So there were a few National Express coaches, but obviously they were selling out quite quick.
Yeah.
So we just had to kind of go in for the earliest one that we could. So we landed at around, we got off the plane at around midnight, and then we had to camp in the airport till 4:30. That was our first coach.
Yeah.
Then we got a coach down to Birmingham, and then we had to get another coach down to London, and then obviously the trains. So yeah, it was a bit of a long, sorry stay.
Blimey. I mean, but you still had a nice time in Budapest anyway.
Oh yeah, I'd recommend it for anyone, but yeah, maybe try and avoid Ryanair.
Maybe go in the summer when it's not quite so stormy.
Well,
but
yeah.
Listen, Dom, great to talk to you. Glad you got back safe and sound. Thank you very much indeed. Dom Biela there. We're talking about how, what a nightmare, 22.5 hours to go a journey that would normally take 2.5. Absolutely extraordinary times. And there's more of it probably coming up over the course of the next couple of days as well.